Gen Psych folks, it's Dr. Gilchrist, and I'm here to talk a little bit about consciousness so that we can move into Chapter 3 and make good progress toward our exam, and also because we do not have class on Wednesday. So I'd like you to watch this and be prepared to talk about issues related to child development when we have class again in person on Friday. So where we last left off in class, we were doing some fun demonstrations, and now we need to get to our understanding of what consciousness is. So consciousness can be kind of a working definition, kind of like what I said in class. Like, we generally don't have the best definition of consciousness, and it can vary, and our understanding of it can change. So for the purposes of this class, I'm going to go ahead and define consciousness as our subjective experience of the external world and of mental activity. So knowing what we're capable of, what we're experiencing, what we are aware of. Now, what's really critical is that this is going to be a private experience for each person. And that's because we are all different from each other. Our subjective thresholds and how we experience the world are going to be different. And this is what is known as qualia. So interestingly enough, what this means is that if I'm looking at the color red and you're looking at the color red, I can never be 100% sure if the red that you and I both see are exactly the same. And because it's so difficult to have a good working definition, and because our consciousness can be so subjective, it does make it very difficult for people to actually study consciousness. But this is a case where something like psychology can help us. So to kind of talk about consciousness, one of the things that's actually kind of interesting to me about consciousness is that it doesn't necessarily make our lives easier being aware of these different processes. So what you're looking at here is a comic called The Miracle of Consciousness, making the human the only animal that can be the master of its destiny. And so you can see here we've got a man eating a sandwich. Why am I eating this stuff? It's terrible for me, but I can't stop. Pigeon, eating seed, doesn't really care. I wonder why I keep going out with her. She's totally wrong for me. Pigeon with another pigeon as a mate, doesn't really think that much about it. Oh no, I'm yelling at Wayne. There's going to be trouble. Why am I losing my temper? Pigeon scaring off another pigeon without a second thought. So just because we are aware of ourselves and of these processes, it doesn't necessarily mean that we always act in accordance with our understanding. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different levels of consciousness that we experience. So I want you to start by thinking about when you first learned a very difficult task. So an example of that might be something like driving. So I remember when I first learned to drive, I got my learner's permit, and it's one thing to know the rules of the road and actually pass that written test. It is quite another to actually put that into action. I had difficulty distinguishing between my gas and my brake. I wasn't very good at cutting the wheel, and I had a lot of difficulty paying attention to all of the different things going on around me. So when you first learn a difficult task, you are fully conscious of every single step. You're very alert. And oftentimes we're going to find that our consciousness is fully engaged in tasks that are either really difficult for us or are new to us. But generally what we're going to find is that as we get better, the tasks become more automatic. Some of you have been driving enough to the point where you can go somewhere very familiar, get out of the car, and realize that you drove the whole way, but you don't remember anything about the drive. And that's because driving, especially to well-known areas, become much more automatic for you. And because of that, the more automatic that something becomes, the less conscious we become of what we are doing. So an example of this is the Stroop effect that we did the first week of class. You read so automatically that you don't even realize it until it's coming into conflict with naming an ink color. But the problem is, and as I kind of showed you with some of the different tasks, you're only going to have so much attention for all of your conscious experiences. So we did our card trick, and this is an issue related to selective attention. So when you pick that card, you pay attention to it. And because you're focused on it, you don't easily pay attention to the other cards that you didn't pick. And then when I tell you to whisper the name of the card in your mind, you're paying attention more and more to the card you picked and less to the cards around you. And so because of that, when it looks like I took your card, many of you were so focused on the card that you picked that you didn't realize that none of those cards are actually present in the array. Now, our attention is selective and it can shift. There's a very famous phenomenon called the cocktail party effect, where there are a lot of auditory conversations going on around you. When you're in the dining hall, there's constant competition for those auditory processes. But what we find, should probably have some of this. What we find is that you're able to pay enough attention to the conversation going on in front of you. You can take that selective attention and hone in on the conversation that you're having, despite the fact that there's all this other noise going on around you that you're filtering out. So attention means that we are picking some information over others to pay attention to and to process. And as I kind of showed in the dichotic listening task, you can make use of information that you are not consciously aware of. As I mentioned, we can shift our attention to relevant information when we need to, but sometimes we are so focused on what we are doing that we lose sight of other things going on around us. And this is what is known as inattentional blindness, which is what we did in our awareness test. So when you are counting the passes that the team in the white shirts make, you are so focused on that you miss things that would have otherwise gotten your attention. Generally, a gorilla or a moonwalking bear is going to be so obvious in your view that you'd normally catch it. But because your attention is otherwise occupied, you miss it. And this is what inattentional blindness is. In addition to having inattentional blindness, we can also have change blindness. And I will show you this video before class starts on Friday, but we can miss changes in stimuli as well. So if I suddenly ducked down and changed into a different hockey jersey, most of you would probably not notice the difference. But that's because the shirt that I'm wearing doesn't change the fact that I'm still Dr. Gilchrist. I'm still wearing a hockey jersey and I'm still lecturing to you about attention. So we can have inattentional blindness when we miss bizarre stimuli because our attention is otherwise engaged. And we can have change blindness where we don't notice small, subtle changes in our visual environment. And one of the things that we find is that sometimes unconscious processing that we are not aware of, can also affect our behavior. An example of this is what are known as Freudian slips. So, for example, if I needed to go grab something and I told you all, be back in a sec, but I accidentally said be back in a sex, somebody like Sigmund Freud or somebody in the psychodynamic perspective is going to say that, well, I was probably thinking about sex. That's why I said it. But the truth of the matter is that when we're searching for words to say, we often pick words that sound alike. And so what probably happened is I grabbed the closest sounding word to sec, but I missed it because of that interference. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Additionally, we can have subliminal processing where we are actually capable of processing sensory information without having that conscious awareness. And again, I will show you this video at the beginning of class on Friday. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out. Please read about sleep on your own time. This was about 10 minutes, so I want to spend maybe the next 20 or 30 minutes talking about child development. So I will see you next time. Bye.